Welcome, traveler of history. Tonight, we walk into the forbidden shadows of America's Prohibition, a time when a nation tried to ban desire itself, when laws were written to purify souls, and instead gave birth to blood, corruption, and hidden empires. Close your eyes and step with me into the war America waged against its own heart. Close your eyes for a moment, traveler. Imagine yourself standing on a quiet American street in the year 1919. The war in Europe has just ended. Soldiers return home with medals on their chests, but shadows in their eyes. Industry is booming, cities are swelling, and jazz is beginning to whisper in the dance halls. Yet beneath this surface of modernity, something else is stirring. An older, deeper struggle. A war not fought with rifles and cannons, but with laws, sermons, and bottles of liquor. America is about to declare war on itself. In churches across the nation, fiery preachers thunder about sin and purity. They speak of alcohol as the devil's drink, a poison that ruins families, corrupts men, and drags women into misery. In crowded halls, mothers weep as they recall their husbands staggering home from saloons, wages squandered, tempers sharpened into violence. The temperance movement, as it is called, grows louder every year. An army of moral reformers convinced that the salvation of the nation depends on banning drink forever. But step outside those church walls and you will hear a different sound. Laughter spilling out from taverns, the clink of glasses in workingmen's bars, the warm glow of gaslight shining through smoky windows. For many, the saloon is not a place of ruin, but of belonging, a refuge after long hours in factories and mines. It is where workers share stories, where immigrants cling to the traditions of their homelands, where loneliness is washed away, at least for a night. Two Americas are forming side by side, one that dreams of purity and one that refuses to surrender its pleasures. You stand in the middle of this divide. On one side, a woman in a plain dress holds a banner that reads, "Lips that touch liquor shall never touch mine." On the other, a group of men raise their glasses in defiance, laughing, singing, promising that no law will ever take away their beer. The air is heavy, not with smoke or whiskey, but with conflict. It is the scent of a nation turning against itself. And yet, beneath all of this, a larger question lingers. Why do humans need enemies to fight, even when peace is at hand? Why, after the horrors of the Great War, does America choose to create another battlefield within its own borders? Perhaps it is fear. Fear that freedom without restraint will destroy the very fabric of society. Or perhaps it is pride, the belief that through law and force one can purify the human spirit. Soon, the 18th Amendment will be ratified. The noble experiment, as its supporters call it, will begin. But noble dreams often cast long shadows, and in those shadows, empires of blood and corruption are waiting to be born. Step with me into the twilight of this age. Tonight, we walk into the heart of America's forbidden war. Imagine for a moment the America of the early 20th century not as a land of saloons and smoke, but as a nation filled with preachers, reformers, and mothers who truly believed, that the bottle was the root of every sorrow. In small towns and great cities alike, banners fluttered in the wind. Protect our homes, ban the drink. Churches became command posts of a moral crusade. Women of the temperance movement, many of them poor, widowed, or broken by years of abuse, stepped forward with fire in their voices. They told stories of husbands who drank away their wages, of children who went hungry while the father stumbled home drunk, of nights filled with fear rather than peace. The cry was not only for morality, but for survival. These women, many of them members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, saw themselves as warriors in a holy battle. Their weapon was not the gun, but the law. If liquor could be erased from the land, then perhaps hunger would vanish, violence would recede, and the American family could finally live in dignity. And in that dream, there was hope. Imagine walking into a gathering hall in 1910. You would see rows of ordinary people, farmers, housewives, workers, listening to a preacher paint a vision of a radiant future. Streets free of drunkenness, homes full of harmony, churches filled with grateful prayers. The people nod, some with tears in their eyes. They are not imagining power or wealth, they are imagining peace. But dreams, traveler, are often dangerous, for in the desire to build heaven, we sometimes create new forms of hell. Alcohol was declared not just a danger, but a sin that had to be erased. And with each sermon, each rally, each fiery speech, the nation's conscience was divided more sharply. To drink became not just a personal choice, but a mark of rebellion against God, family, and country. Those who raised a glass were branded as enemies of morality itself. What makes human beings so eager to believe that purity can be forced upon society? Perhaps it is the ache for order in a world that feels chaotic. Perhaps it is the longing for control over what cannot be controlled. Human weakness, desire, and sorrow. By 1919, the dream had gathered unstoppable force. The Constitution itself was changed. The 18th Amendment declared that no more wine, no more whiskey, no more beer would flow in the United States of America. The law of man, it was said, would finally match the law of God. And for a brief moment, as the ink dried on that sacred text, the dreamers rejoiced. They believed the war was won, that temptation had been crushed, that a new age had begun. But traveler, look closer. Behind their joy, in the silence of empty streets, shadows were already forming, because whenever something is forbidden, desire only grows stronger. And where there is desire, there will always be someone willing to feed it. For a price, the dream of a pure society was born, but in its shadow, the empires of corruption were already waiting. Imagine walking down a city street on the night the law takes hold. It is January 1920, the first days of Prohibition. Once, this street would have been alive with music, the laughter of men spilling from crowded saloons, the soft glow of lanterns illuminating clouds of tobacco smoke. But tonight, the doors are bolted, windows are dark. The saloon, that heartbeat of working-class America, has fallen silent. Step closer. Press your hand against the wooden door of one of these taverns. You can almost hear echoes that still linger within. Songs, arguments, confessions, whispered over half-empty mugs. Now there is only dust, the clink of glass left behind, and the sound of your own breath. The law has won, or so it seems. For the men who once gathered here, the disappearance of alcohol is more than a loss of drink. It is the loss of community. The saloon was a second home for immigrants, a place where accents mixed, where loneliness was softened by the warmth of shared stories. In the land of strangers, it was a refuge. Now the refuge is gone, and what fills the void when belonging is taken away? Already, in the basements and alleys, whispers begin to spread. A man you do not know places a hand on your shoulder. He offers you a password, a knock at a hidden door, a bottle smuggled across borders. What was once public and open is now secret and forbidden. The drink has not vanished, it has only gone underground. The government declared victory, but the truth is different. By outlawing the saloon, it has created something far more dangerous, the speakeasy. Behind locked doors and false walls, illegal bars begin to bloom like mushrooms after rain. Here, jazz musicians play for hidden crowds. Bootleggers deliver barrels under the cover of night, and men and women sip with the thrill of defiance burning in their veins. Traveler, reflect for a moment. Why does the forbidden taste sweeter? Why does silence make the music louder in our memory? Perhaps it is because humanity is drawn to shadows as much as to light. The more society says you must not, the more the soul whispers, I will. The saloon may be dead, but in its place something darker and more powerful is being born. A world where alcohol is no longer just a drink, but a symbol of rebellion, profit and power. And in those smoky, hidden rooms, the first foundations of criminal empires are already being laid. Step carefully, for beyond this silence, the night is about to erupt with blood and ambition. Step into the alleys of Chicago, 1921. The city hums with a strange new rhythm. On the surface, it appears calm. Bars shuttered, bottles seized, posters proclaiming the triumph of the noble experiment. But beneath that quiet lies another heartbeat, steady and growing louder. It is the pulse of an empire taking shape. Where the state withdraws, others rush to fill the void. Bootleggers in battered trucks haul barrels down back roads under the cover of darkness. Smugglers ferry whiskey from Canada across frozen lakes. Homemade stills bubble in kitchens and barns, turning sugar, corn, and danger into liquid gold. Each bottle is more than drink, it is profit. And profit demands protection. This is where new rulers emerge. Al Capone, still young, already ruthless, mastering the balance of charm and violence. Lucky Luciano, with the vision of an empire run like a corporation, stretching beyond any single city. Meyer Lansky, quiet and calculating, who learns to turn dirty money into clean fortunes. They are not simple criminals. They are builders, architects of a hidden order designed by Prohibition itself. Picture a smoky back room where these men gather, not with holy texts or patriotic speeches, but with maps of smuggling routes, lists of bribed officials, and stacks of money piled high. Their language is the language of markets. They know what lawmakers refuse to admit. The thirst of the people cannot be erased. Chicago becomes a battlefield. New York turns into a labyrinth of speakeasies, each paying tribute to unseen masters. Cash flows upward like a river of gold. Blood flows downward into the gutters. And with every hidden bar, every smuggled shipment, every silent deal with a crooked officer, the foundations of these empires grow stronger. It is a paradox of history. The more fiercely a society tries to outlaw desire, the more fiercely desire transforms itself into power. The crusade for purity has not destroyed temptation. It has created kings without crowns, emperors without thrones. Their dominion is not marked on maps, yet it stretches across the nation. Walk through the streets of Chicago in your mind, a jazz melody leaking from a concealed doorway, muffled laughter rising from a hidden room, and somewhere in the distance, the mechanical rattle of a Tommy gun. This is no longer the America of reformers and preachers. This is the America of shadows, and its empires of blood are only just beginning to rise. Chicago, mid-1920s. The air carries a different kind of music now. Not the hymns of reformers, not the jazz of hidden speakeasies, but the staccato rhythm of gunfire. The city has become a battlefield, its streets stained with the price of prohibition. Once, crime was a matter of theft, extortion, or small-time rackets. But alcohol has changed the scale. Now entire neighborhoods belong to rival factions, each vying for control of the river of liquor flowing through hidden channels. Trucks loaded with barrels are guarded as if they were carrying treasure. And to many, they are worth more than gold. Al Capone rises to power here, his empire built not only on supply but on spectacle. Newspapers call him Scarface. The public whispers his name with both fear and fascination. His enemies fall one by one, riddled with bullets in alleys, ambushed in restaurants, shot down in their own cars. Violence becomes not the exception but the rule, the language through which business is negotiated and territory defended. The streets echo with events like the St. Valentine's Day massacre, when 7 men were lined against a wall and cut down in a storm of bullets. It was not the first, nor the last, but it carved itself into the memory of a nation. Ordinary citizens who once believed in the dream of a pure society now watch in horror as bodies pile up, realizing that the law meant to save them has birthed something far more terrifying. And yet the fascination grows Crowds gather outside courtrooms to catch a glimpse of Capone, some even cheering him as if he were a folk hero. Photographers scramble to capture his smile, his tailored suits, his air of untouchable confidence. Here is the paradox. A man who rules by fear becomes an object of strange admiration. Why is it that human beings are drawn to violence even as they condemn it? Perhaps it is because in violence we glimpse raw power, stripped of pretense, something primal that civilized life hides but never erases. The gangster, in his brutality, becomes a mirror of the darker instincts we try to deny. For the ordinary citizen, life continues. Children walk to school, markets bustle, factories churn. But under this rhythm of daily survival, there is a hum of danger, like a drumbeat in the distance. At any moment, the peace of the morning can be shattered by the rattle of a machine gun. By the late 1920s, Chicago has earned its reputation as the murder capital of America. Streets once filled with workers and families now carry the ghosts of those who fell in the name of forbidden liquor. And through it all, the hidden empires grow stronger, their roots watered with blood. The dream of purity lies in ruins. What remains is a nation learning that when desire is outlawed, violence becomes the price of satisfaction. The war for liquor was never fought by gangsters alone. Behind every truckload of whiskey and every speakeasy door, there were men in suits who allowed it to happen. If bullets ruled the streets, bribes ruled the offices of power. Consider the police officer on the beat. His salary is meager, his uniform worn thin, his family depending on every dollar he earns. Then comes an offer. Cash slipped discreetly into his hand, or perhaps a bottle of fine whiskey for his table at home. All he has to do is look the other way as a truck passes through his district. One choice, one nod of silence, and a small fortune is made. Multiply that by thousands of officers across the nation, and the law itself becomes hollow, a shell riddled with corruption. The rot climbs higher. City Hall becomes a marketplace of favors. Mayors, judges, aldermen, all too willing to take a share. In Chicago, it is said that entire elections were bought with bootleg money. Candidates did not just promise reforms, they promised loyalty to the underworld that financed them. And at the very top, senators in Washington preached morality by day and drank imported scotch by night. The hypocrisy was not hidden, it was flaunted in whispers. Laws meant to protect society became weapons for the powerful, who discovered that nothing paid better than prohibition itself. The silence had a price, and everyone knew it. A bar that paid its dues to the right officials could thrive in safety, while another, less fortunate, would be raided and destroyed as an example. Justice was not blind. It was bought and sold, like barrels of whiskey themselves. For the reformers, it was the ultimate betrayal. The dream of a pure society, founded on faith and sacrifice, had become a marketplace of greed. And for ordinary citizens, the line between lawman and outlaw blurred until it vanished altogether. Was the policeman guarding the street a protector of order, or a servant of the same empires he claimed to fight? This corruption was not just political, it was psychological. Once a man accepts silence for money, what is left of his honor? Once a nation accepts corruption as normal, what is left of its soul? Prohibition, once called the noble experiment, had turned into the greatest stage for hypocrisy America had ever seen. And in that hypocrisy, hidden empires thrived, feeding on silence as much as on liquor. When history remembers Prohibition, it often recalls the gangsters, the machine guns, the smoky speakeasies where jazz played until dawn. But beneath those bright images lies another story, one quieter, grimmer, and far more tragic. The story of those who did not profit, who did not fight for power, but who paid the deepest price. Picture the American worker in 1922. He comes home after 12 hours in a steel mill or on a factory line, his body aching, his lungs filled with soot. Once he might have stopped at a saloon for a single beer to ease his exhaustion. Now the doors are locked. What remains is the black market, where liquor is expensive, dangerous, and often deadly. For in the shadows of Prohibition, a new poison flourished. To meet demand, bootleggers turned to industrial alcohol, chemicals never meant for human consumption. Factories used it for cleaning, for fuel, for machinery. But with crude distillation and flavoring, it was transformed into gin or whiskey for desperate customers. Thousands drank it. Thousands went blind, sick, or died in agony. And the government knew. In fact, officials even ordered that industrial alcohol be deliberately poisoned to discourage bootleggers. But the warning did not save lives, it destroyed them. Those who suffered most were not the gangsters or the politicians, but the ordinary poor, who could not afford smuggled scotch or high-quality contraband. Families buried their fathers, their brothers, their sons, victims not of vice, but of a cruel experiment in control. The victims were not only the dead. Prohibition tore at the very fabric of families. With alcohol driven underground, drinking became secretive, hidden, shameful. Husbands who once drank openly now vanished into alleys, returning with spirits of far greater strength. Domestic violence, the very evil reformers had hoped to eliminate, often grew worse. Children lived in fear of fathers whose anger was sharpened by desperation. Wives lived with silence and suspicion, their homes turning into battlegrounds of secrecy and mistrust. There were other victims too, the immigrants whose culture had long been tied to drink. German Americans who once brewed beer in their neighborhoods found their traditions criminalized overnight. Italians whose wine accompanied every meal suddenly saw it labeled as contraband. For them, Prohibition was not only a law, but an erasure of identity, a declaration that their way of life was un-American. And then there were the children. Imagine a young boy watching his father led away in handcuffs, arrested not for violence or theft, but for brewing a few bottles of beer in the basement to make ends meet. Imagine a young girl whose mother sells illegal liquor to pay the rent, growing up in fear of police raids and social shame. These children learned early that law and justice were not the same, that survival sometimes meant breaking rules. Behind the grand stories of gangsters and jazz lies this harsher truth. Prohibition inflicted wounds that could not be glamorized. The reformers dreamed of protecting families. Instead, they created a world where the weakest suffered the most, where the poor became poisoned, where immigrants were humiliated, where children were scarred by the hypocrisy of adults. Perhaps the cruelest irony was this: the law that sought to heal ended up harming those it claimed to defend. History may remember Capone's empire or the music of the speakeasies, but the true measure of Prohibition's failure lies in the graves of the forgotten, the silences of broken homes, and the invisible scars carried for generations. When you walk through this chapter of history in your mind, do not think only of the gangsters with their guns or the politicians with their bribes. Think of the unseen victims, ordinary souls who had no power, no wealth, and no voice. For in their suffering, the true cost of America's noble experiment is revealed. By the early 1930s, the dream had rotted from within. What was once proclaimed as the noble experiment had become a national joke, a law mocked in whispers and ignored in practice. Speakeasies outnumbered the saloons they replaced. Gangsters lived like kings. Politicians grew fat with bribes, and ordinary citizens drank in secret, shaking their heads at the hypocrisy of it all. The Great Depression only deepened the farce. As factories closed and breadlines lengthened, the government realized it was starving itself of revenue. Before Prohibition, liquor taxes had supplied nearly half of federal income. Now, in a time of desperate need, that wealth flowed into the hands of criminals. The state was broke, the people were poor, yet rivers of money spilled into the pockets of underworld barons. And so a quiet shift began. Newspapers that once praised Prohibition now criticized it openly. Clergy who had called alcohol a sin began to question whether the cure was worse than the disease. Even former supporters admitted the obvious: the law had failed. In 1932, a new figure rose with the promise of renewal: Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His campaign spoke of hope, of recovery, of the New Deal. But behind the political slogans lay a simple truth: America could no longer afford prohibition. With unemployment soaring and hunger spreading, the tax revenue from alcohol was too precious to ignore. When Roosevelt won the presidency, momentum became unstoppable. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was ratified, repealing prohibition. For the first time in American history, an amendment was struck down by another. The nation had admitted its mistake. The end came not with explosions or riots, but with a sigh of relief, and in many places with celebration. Breweries reopened, barrels rolled down the streets once more, and taverns lit their lamps as if waking from a long slumber. Photographs show crowds raising glasses, smiling through the hardship of the Depression, toasting not only to drink, but to freedom itself. Yet beneath the laughter lay bitterness. 13 years had been wasted in a war against desire. Thousands of lives were lost to poisoned alcohol, countless families broken, corruption rooted deep in the soil of politics and law enforcement. Gangsters, far from vanishing, emerged stronger, wealthier, more organized, now branching into gambling, drugs, and legitimate businesses. The scars of prohibition did not disappear with its repeal. They lingered in institutions, in neighborhoods, in culture. There is a peculiar cruelty in the way history sometimes unfolds. What began as a crusade to purify society ended in a kind of national comedy, a lesson told with a wry smile. Citizens joked that the only amendment to the Constitution that truly worked was the one that erased another, but for many, the laughter was hollow. Behind the toasts and songs of 1933 lay the graves of those who had been poisoned, the broken homes left behind, the cities reshaped by violence. The law was gone, but its ghosts remained. Prohibition had been sold as an experiment in morality. What it revealed was a darker truth: that no law, no amendment, no decree from the powerful can erase the desires of the human heart. The great experiment was over. Its lesson, however, was just beginning. The law was gone, but its shadow stretched long over the American century. Prohibition did not simply vanish with the repeal. It left behind scars and structures that shaped the nation in ways its architects could never have imagined. The most visible legacy was the rise of organized crime. The gangs born in the speakeasies of the 1920s did not vanish when the taps opened again. They adapted. The fortunes built on bootleg whiskey became the seed money for casinos in Las Vegas, for nightclubs in New York, for legitimate industries that still carried the fingerprints of blood. Families like the Chicago Outfit or the Genovese crime family learned a lesson. Crime was not chaos. It could be a business as disciplined and profitable as any corporation. Prohibition had been their training ground, and the skills they mastered would echo for generations. Law enforcement, too, was transformed. Before Prohibition, local police were poorly funded, often informal, little more than neighborhood watchmen in uniform. The battle against bootlegging forced the federal government to expand its reach. The Bureau of Prohibition, later absorbed into the FBI, developed new methods of surveillance, infiltration, and intelligence gathering. Out of a failed crusade grew the foundation of America's modern policing and federal power. The nation had learned that enforcing morality required force on a scale never before imagined. Culturally, Prohibition carved deep lines into the American psyche. It taught citizens a new relationship with authority, not one of obedience, but of defiance. Millions of ordinary people who had never considered themselves criminals became lawbreakers overnight, simply by taking a drink. This quiet rebellion planted seeds of skepticism toward government that would flourish later in the century. When Americans debated new moral laws about drugs, about sexuality, about censorship, They remembered Prohibition and the failure of trying to legislate desire. There were other legacies, subtler but lasting. The Jazz Age, immortalized in novels and films, might never have burned so brightly without the fuel of hidden speakeasies where music and rebellion mingled. The image of the gangster, half villain, half folk hero, became an enduring myth, shaping everything from Hollywood movies to television dramas. Even today, when a film shows a man in a tailored suit raising a glass in defiance, it is Prohibition's shadow you are seeing. And then there is the moral lesson, harder to measure, impossible to erase. Prohibition revealed something uncomfortable about human nature, that attempts to control it often unleash forces far worse than the ones we seek to suppress. The reformers dreamed of protecting families. Instead, they created empires of corruption. They dreamed of healing the nation. Instead, they taught it to lie, to bribe, to look away. Yet even in failure, Prohibition left behind a paradoxical gift, a reminder that law and morality are not the same, that a society cannot be purified by decree. It forced Americans to confront the complexity of their own desires, their contradictions, their capacity for both order and chaos. Stand in America today, and you will still see echoes of that age. In every debate over drug legalization, in every controversy over censorship, in every clash between personal freedom and collective morality, the ghost of Prohibition speaks. It whispers a warning that the human heart cannot be legislated, and that the pursuit of purity often ends in corruption. The speakeasies are gone, their doors sealed by time. The gangsters are dead, their empires scattered. But the legacy remains, woven into the politics, the culture, and the memory of a nation that once tried to outlaw its own desires. The last bottle has been emptied, the last saloon shuttered, the last gangster silenced by time. And yet, the echoes of Prohibition still linger, faint but unmistakable, like the taste of something bitter that never fully fades. This journey began with a dream, a vision of purity, of homes free from violence, of men returning wages intact, of children growing up without fear. It was a dream carried by mothers, preachers, reformers, and politicians who believed that a nation could be cleansed through law. But as we have walked together through these years, you have seen how quickly dreams turn to shadows. The locked saloons gave rise to hidden rooms where desire burned even brighter. The cry for purity gave birth to empires of corruption. Streets once filled with laughter turned red with blood. Politicians who preached morality drank in secret, while the poor suffered and the desperate died from poison. And when the dream collapsed in 1933, it left behind not clarity, but scars. Gangsters turned into businessmen, corruption woven into the very fabric of institutions, and a society forever reminded that to outlaw desire is to invite rebellion. Traveler, let us pause here and look back. What truly was Prohibition? Was it a noble failure, an experiment that proved the futility of controlling the human spirit? Was it a lesson in hypocrisy, showing how power bends even the most righteous ideals? Or was it perhaps a mirror, reflecting not only the America of the 1920s, but something deeper about human nature itself? We live in a world where Prohibition has become legend, wrapped in the glamour of jazz, speakeasies, and gangsters in fine suits. Hollywood has turned it into spectacle, and novels have dressed it in romance. But peel back that layer of myth, and you will find the real story. Of poisoned families, of broken communities, of laws that betrayed the very people they promised to protect. And maybe this is the most haunting legacy of all, that Prohibition was not unique. It was only one chapter in a longer tale, the eternal struggle between order and freedom, between morality imposed from above and desire rising from below. Each generation fights this battle anew. Today, the debate may not be about alcohol, but about drugs, censorship, or the boundaries of personal choice. Yet in every argument, the ghost of prohibition whispers its warning: beware of the cost of purity. So here, at the end of our journey, I ask you, if you had lived then, where would you have stood? Would you have raised your voice with the reformers, demanding a clean society? Would you have slipped into the shadows of a speakeasy, glass in hand, defying the law? Or would you, like so many, have found yourself trapped between them, caught in a war between ideals and reality? This is the question history leaves us with, and perhaps it is a question without an easy answer. As you reflect tonight, I invite you to share your thoughts. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? I want to know not only your place on the map, but your place in this story. Because history is not only what has been, it is what we remember, what we choose to carry forward, what lessons we take into our own lives. And tonight, as we close the book on Prohibition, its lesson is clear: no law can extinguish human desire. At best, it can guide it. At worst, it can twist it into something darker than the thing it tried to erase. Traveler, this is where our path ends for now. But the road of history stretches endlessly ahead, lined with shadows, secrets, and stories waiting to be told. In the weeks to come, we will step into other forbidden chapters, forgotten wars, hidden empires, the mysteries of belief and power. Until then, hold this story close. Let it remind you of both the fragility and the resilience of the human spirit. And when you next raise a glass, whether in joy and sorrow or in quiet reflection, remember that you are touching not only your own life, but the echo of a nation that once tried and failed to control the very heart of its people. Good night, traveler. Thank you for walking with me through the shadows of Prohibition. Until we meet again in the next story, stay curious, stay awake, and keep listening to the whispers of history.